The station where our veterans' voices are heard. MBR Talk.
Hey, thanks for supporting our channel by watching and listening.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Desde Brooklyn hasta el sol del Medio Oriente, José Flores con fuego en la mente. Raised in the Bronx where dreams don't sleep, donde el hambre te enseña a resistir. Sectionoid life, no handouts, no cheat. He built his power from the pain on the street.
Cada golpe, cada lágrima caída fue el fuego que encendió su vida. Ahora camina con propósito y voz. José Flores, hear the noise. De la calle al combate, turn his trials into faith. Disciplina y con fe, now he rises every day. From the black to the world, sin temor.
You ever need a haircut?
So
that these kids can learn how to play instruments, or want to, not just learn, but want to. But I think that there's a major shift.
Iraq to Korea, he led from the front. Now he lifts others, never just stunts. Hoy es mentor, líder, amigo.
¿Qué pasa, mi gente? Welcome to the Motivated Mindset. I'm your host, Jose Antonio Flores, but we'll just keep it to Jose Flores. I'm a proud Latino born and raised in New York City. Yay. Straight out of the Bronx, raised in Brooklyn, up in here. You know what? That's that New York flavor, that hustle, that grit. It shaped me. It built me and still drives todo lo que yo hago today. So I am a combat veteran who proudly served 30 years in the United States Army. And look, before we get rolling, I want to send out a powerful salute to all my veterans, service members, and my first responders listening. Mucho respeto, you already know, because, you know, one of the greatest blessings of my life was joining the United States Army. And, you know, the Army just didn't give me a career. No, it gave me good food too, but that's something else. It gave me purpose. It gave me discipline. It gave me leadership. I had the honor of serving under some great, incredible leaders, men and women who taught me that leadership is not about rank, titles, or power. True leadership is about service. It's about accountability. It's about inspiring people to believe in themselves, even when they couldn't see their own potential, like I was at 17. I learned that real leaders don't just give orders, they coach, they mentor, they teach, and they listen. They lead from the front. Over the years, I've had the privilege of shaping and developing soldiers from all walks of life, young men and women, searching for dirección, como yo estaba, right? Direction, trying to find confidence, trying to discover who they are, who they were. And what I realized that leadership isn't something you do in uniform. It becomes parte de quien tú eres, who you are. Even today, those lessons still guide me. They help me. They show up for people. They help me motivate others through struggle. They help me coach, mentor, train, and encourage people to push past their limitations and become un poco más fuerte, become stronger mentally, physically, emotionally, y también spiritually. That spirit of leadership is still alive in todo lo que yo hago, in everything I do. And now in this new chapter in my life, I wear a lot of different hats other than this cool one. You like that? Look, I'm a motivational speaker, a certified personal trainer, certified media, and yes, even an end-of-life death doula. But behind all those titles, I have one mission, is to serve people, because I know what struggle feels like. I know what pain feels like, and I know that what it means to fight your way toward purpose. Todos los días, every day, my mission is simple: to inspire, to uplift, to challenge, to remind people that no matter where you started in life, you know, or what life throws at you, you can redefine your life through faith, discipline, resilience, and relentless drive. That's why this podcast exists. The Motivated Mindset is where we talk about resilience. We talk about culture, healing, leadership, discipline, optimism, and the courage it takes to keep moving forward, even when life swings real hard at you. We keep it real here. New York City real, straight talk, Bronx humor, you know, zero sugar coating. You're going to laugh, right? You're going to do some reflection. You're going to get fired up. Yay. How you doing? Maybe even shed a tear. And I don't mean because you're cut of onions. But one thing I promise you, you will look stronger when you first press that play button, because this isn't about motivation. It's about transformation. And, you know, and one last thing before we start, if you vibe with what you hear, right? If this conversation inspires you, it's like, yo, I like that. If you appreciate the interviews, the energy, what's up, yay, yay, and the message, all I ask for you is to support our channel. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, scan that QR code, and share it with somebody who could use a little motivation. You know why? Because your support helps me continue to bring you powerful guests, meaningful conversation, and purpose driven content straight to you. All right, familia, let's get into it. You know, so let's talk about who our guest is, who the MAN, that means man, right? But let me tell you about who we got that's just stupendous. And it's someone whose work is helping people rewrite their stories and tell themselves they can move from confusion to clarity, from pain to purpose, and from simply surviving to truly live. Joining us today is Karlos DelToro, a strategic intervention and career coach who specializes in helping people navigate major life transitions and rediscover direction in their personal and professional lives. You know, what makes Karlos unique is the way he blends deep empathy with practical wisdom, drawing from more than a decade of coaching experience, you know, and a background in screenwriting and story analysis for over 30 years in public service. He understands something powerful. The story we tell ourselves can either imprison us or set us free. His work focuses on helping people reshape that internal narrative so they can step into clarity and resilience and purpose. Whether someone is facing career uncertainty, grief, personal loss, relationship struggles, or simply feeling stuck in life, Karlos helps people connect with who they are and where they're meant to go. His message especially resonates with young men, and if anybody, women searching for identity, purpose, direction, and healthier relationships in today's world. With training and strategic intervention, grief recovery, and faith-based coaching, Karlos brings that compassion, being authentic, right? Wisdom and grounded leadership into every conversation. And today we're gonna be diving deep into mindset transformation, resilience, purpose, and how the power of rewriting your story makes a difference. Family, this is going to be a powerful one. So siéntate para atrás, stick back, lean in, café, you know, and we're going to welcome our guests in un momento. Here we go.
The interview of the week is brought to you by Jersey Mike's, a sub above.
Carlos, what's up?
Hey, Jose, how are you today, my friend?
Hey, man, my brother, thank you for being on here. We're so excited, man, that you are here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. So, you know, hey, you know, let's start with who Karlos is, you know, where you're from, and let people get to know who you are.
Absolutely. I noted from your introduction that we have a few similarities. So I also am Latino, but I think I want to start by saying that I am a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. These are all the key people in my life, and I'm a servant of the Most High and a servant of everyone out there. So that's basically who I am. I'm Puerto Rican. I was raised in New York City. I was raised in not in the Bronx, so I was raised in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. We got that little rivalry going on, but we'll talk about that another day. So I was in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and then in my high school years and beyond, I lived in Jamaica, Queens. I've worked, as you said, for over 30 years in public service. Started my career in Washington, D.C., and worked for the federal government in the early 90s. Then I came to Pennsylvania because I had some plans here. I stayed in Pennsylvania with state government for about 16 years. Went back to DC because I hadn't had enough yet. So I went back and did that until I retired in February of last year amid all of the, shall I say, busyness of what was going on last year. Then, but you know, all joking aside, in parallel to all of that, mainly from about 2012 forward, I started a journey that's lasted up until the present as a life coach and a career coach. And we could talk more about that a little bit later. I'm also a story analyst and a screenwriter, and I've been working on that since around 2015. I'm a grief recovery specialist, and I'm also a Christian minister. And I've looked for the commonality through all of this, and what I think kind of unites it all, because there are a lot of interests here, but I think what unites them all is story, right? And we could talk more about that, but essentially every human being has a story arc similar to the stories you would see in a movie or going through a book or even in a song. And my job is to help people to find their story if they haven't written it yet completely the way they want it, to help them to find a way to write it.
Wow, no, that's a lot. That's a lot, man. But you're right. There is a common thread there, you know. And when Carlos, when you're not wearing that coaching hat, right? So what do you do outside of work? And you know that work-life balance we all try to find.
Sure. Well, as you indicated, that there are other interests, and one of the most, as I mentioned, in terms of the kind of things that I'm doing in my professional life, the screenwriting, the story analysis, is because, quite simply, I love movies. I always have. I love movies. I love good quality television. I love a good story. When I was a kid, that was kind of my sanctuary, right? When I had problems at home, I would camp out in a movie theater pretty much all day, every weekend. And that just developed a love in me of story. I love to read. This is one that you probably won't hear too often. I love to study biblical languages, things like Greek and Hebrew.
Wow.
And then and I just love to spend any time that I can with my wife and children, and whenever I get a chance with my grandchildren. So,
well, that's super. You know, I remember when you talk about movies, like I'll never forget when in Brooklyn, when we lived in Brooklyn, they started where they were showing more than one movie, and they had the 4. So you know, they didn't have security too good, so we used to sneak in to check out. Remember that?
I do. I shouldn't admit that publicly, but yeah, I absolutely do. Yeah,
that was a long time
You're talking
ago.
about the double features, right?
Yes, the double features.
I don't think people know what that is today. The double features. Yeah.
No, movies impact us so much, you know, and drive. Like one of my favorite actors is Al Pacino.
Yeah.
He's a method actor, you know, and probably John Travolta, because I used to watch Walking by Carter. But you know, that's something up at Who's He Become. You know, that is amazing, you know. And we have a question from Yvette, and she said, why is it more important than ever to write your own story? My question is, what does rewriting your story actually look like in real life? Not in theory, but in practice. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, the reason, very simply, that it's important to write your own story is because if you don't write it, someone else is going to write it for you, right? And that is probably what's happening with many people who come to coach to life coaching. They've been operating sort of passively based upon scripting that they've received essentially from childhood, you know, scripting from parents and grandparents and authority figures and teachers and friends and the media and everything else around you. And by the way, I'm not saying at all that those things aren't important. All of that has its place, right? However, ultimately, your life is your unique life that you alone are going to live, right? So if you are just operating based upon what everyone else has told you, and I can give you umpteen examples, if you're just doing that, you're not possibly fulfilling the kind of things that you want to do. Example, someone is told when they're a child not to pursue a certain field because it won't make money, right? So, you know, we all know people who are artists at a young age and love to draw, or they love music and tinkering with the guitar or whatever. And then when they go and they express that to an adult, oftentimes, and well-meaning, right, well-intentioned, it's not any kind of nefarious purpose, but sometimes what the child will hear is, you know, that's really wonderful, that's a great hobby, but, you know, you're going to go and study something that's going to help you earn money, and there's really no future in that. And then you go and you ask that same kid when they're, you know, in college or high school age, you say, well, what do you want to do when you go forward? Well, business. And then you say, okay, what kind of business? I mean, they talk about business as if it's just this one huge thing, right? And they say, well, you know, I don't really know. And I say, well, is that what you really want to do? Well, I really love art, but they told me there's no money in that. So you immediately squelch that desire. So what does it look like in real life to help people write their story? Is helping them in many cases rediscover, right? Not necessarily discover, but rediscover something that was lost in the past because of all the scripting and people telling you what you can and cannot do, and then trying to find what those interests are, what those passions are, what those values that you hold already are, so that you can pursue those things moving forward in a way that's more fulfilling and satisfying for you.
No, that's a stupendous, you know, when you mentioned about how we were brung up and what gets put in our minds, you know, like binders. Okay, what you cannot blind, what the binders is it the what you put on horses, like all you see is because of what you've been given, you know.
Exactly.
And I tell you, Carlos, when I joined the Army, it was like going from Earth to Mars, like a whole new world, and that's something I was used to. So that what you just said makes perfect sense.
And it's not that those things aren't important, right, Jose? It's like those things are important, and you need to hear all of it. But if you're making your life decisions only based upon what everyone else is saying, ultimately they're not the ones that have to make the decisions and choose the things that are going to hold them in place for the next 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, think about people who, and I've experienced this myself. You wake up, you follow a career, and I don't want to say totally that's happened to me, but I'm just giving you an example. You know, 20, 30 years down the line, you follow a career, and maybe there's good money, and maybe you have someplace to go every day, and you're contributing and you're adding value, but you wake up and you're wondering, is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? And maybe it's something that you really would never have chosen for yourself in the beginning, but because of circumstance or economics or other reasons that don't really have to do with your internal feelings about that thing. And I don't want to say feelings, but your internal desires. Let's put it that way. You take an entire pathway that is not really aligned with what you had intended really to do. And I think that it's important to recognize that. And it's never really too late to make those kind of changes.
Yeah. And we have a question from Liz. It says, what is the very first tactical step someone takes to start rewriting their story? You know, what should they do? Their first steps?
Yeah, I think the very first thing that you need to do is you need to identify, you need to identify what it is that you actually want, right? Because it sounds so obvious, it's almost offensive. But a lot of people, when you ask them, well, what do you want to do? They don't really know, because they spent sometimes years, decades even, doing what they really didn't care to do or didn't really think about doing. So the first thing to know is, well, what is it that I really want? And there are strategies that you can use to determine that. And then once you know what you want, then you want to start identifying some limiting beliefs that have kept you from following that path. And then you could come up with strategies to go ahead and meet it. But the very first tactical step is just to really, it's the really obvious one, right? To identify what it is that you want.
Yeah. Sometimes that, even after I got out the Army, that is so. And if you talk to a lot of military members, you ask them, they're lost. We've been used to being in this protective bubble, and then you've been doing this, whether you've done one term or another. What you want to do, and it's hard. It really is.
Absolutely.
You're absolutely correct. No, absolutely correct. We have another question from Maria, and she says, what is the first question someone should ask themselves when they feel stuck professionally? You may have answered some of that, but that was a question I got from Maria.
That's okay. Well, if you feel stuck, the first thing I would actually ask is, what do you mean by, I'm not asking you right now, I'm saying, you would ask the person, what do you mean by stuck? So much of coaching, and we can talk specifically about what coaching is later, but what will happen is that we use terminology that we don't necessarily understand, and words mean things, right? Vocabulary is incredibly important. So the kind of words that you use are going to dictate what your future is going to look like. So if you say, I'm stuck, one of the first things I would ask as a coach is, what exactly do you mean by stuck? Well, I'm stuck, a person, that's probably how they'll react. I'm just stuck. I'm not moving anywhere. Well, what would it take to get you unstuck? What does stuck look like? What does unstuck look like? And then you start teasing that out and helping that person identify, because sometimes they may not be necessarily, for example, stuck. Maybe there's a barrier in their way, or maybe there's a challenge that they haven't been able to overcome. That could be a simple thing that if you get that thing out of the way, then they have a clear pathway to move forward. Because, and I guess the main point that I want to make with that is that a lot of times victory is a lot closer than we think. Tony Robbins, who's one of my main teachers, is fond of talking about what he calls a membrane. And a lot of times the success that we want to achieve is just beyond that membrane, and that may be like a 2 millimeter membrane. But sometimes from our vantage point, it looks like something that is just insurmountable and uncrossable, right? But if you realize that success is just a little, if you just push a little bit more, right? If you don't consider yourself stuck, as if you have no agency in the matter. If you understand that you're able to achieve a lot more than you think you are, you can push past that membrane, and then success is waiting right on the other side. So that's the first thing I try to do, is clarify language and help that person to use more empowering language rather than the language that keeps you stuck.
Yeah. No, that is absolutely correct on some of those things. We're going to take a quick 1-minute break, show a commercial, and then we're going to come back from a question from Stephanie. Here we go. Today's episode is being sponsored by Sheeta Sweets. There's nothing like a homemade pound cake, the kind that takes you back to grandma's kitchen. At Sheeta Sweets, every cake is made from scratch with premium ingredients and the love behind Dr. Rashida Johnson's family recipe. From classic vanilla to sweet potato and southern butter, every slice delivers a taste of tradition. Order your custom pound cake today. All right. Hey, order your cake. I've tried it. I can't lie to you. That's some good stuff. So the question we got from Stephanie was, it says, I've guessed you've helped people across private industry, federal government, and state government. What patterns do you see in people who feel lost or disconnected from their career path?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think what I want to focus on there is the word people, right? Mm-hmm. Because whether it's private industry, federal government, state government, any other venue, the commonality in all of this is people. And people have specific needs, and there are many models, but there's one model in particular that I often use, which is something that comes from Tony Robbins. It's referred to as the 6 human needs. And in coaching, just to explain, there are different strategies that you can use and different models that you can use. And the 6 human needs is one strategy. And notice that it says 6 human needs, right? It's not cultural, it's not ethnic, it's not any of those things. It's not based on position, status. It's based upon or industry. It's based upon if you're a human being and you have human needs. I won't go into the details of that right now, but the patterns that you're describing would be found within the context of a model like that, where you identify what's important to people. And you're going to find people who feel disconnected because of not being able to do certain things that are related to their skill sets that they possess at the deepest levels. You're going to find common language that people use, like stuck, or metaphors that they use, like I'm at the end of my rope, or something of that nature. And and that's going to be universal regardless of what industry they're coming from. You're going to see people who are limited in terms of their understanding of what categories of jobs there are out there, what kind of opportunities are available. So they've only been looking at things sort of in a very direct way, without understanding the potential to do similar things. They think, in other words, put it differently, they think that there's only one way to get what it is that they're trying to achieve. So one of the exercises I would go through with a person like that is something called mind mapping, where you identify several different interests that they have and then help them find different combinations of how they could potentially do that thing to achieve what it is that they truly want. So if they're thinking, well, the only way that I could do this is by getting this type of position, it's likely not true. There are probably many ways that that can achieve that, because what they're not understanding is that it's not the specifics of the job or the occupation. It is the thing that they're looking for to do. In other words, is it service that really motivates them? Is it helping people? Is it is it doing something with their hands and building something? That's the thing that is going to actually lead them to satisfaction. And there are many ways that you can do that to get to that point. So I hope I didn't go too far around the block, but if you need more on that, let me know.
No, and that's interesting, with everything you said, because it sounds similar like to other professions. So like, what is life coaching, and how is it different from other professions such as psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, counselors in consult? How is that different from what you do, so people can kind of separate?
Yeah, great question. I'm so glad you asked that. So coaching has been around for decades, at least 3 decades, but it wasn't called coaching in the sense that it's called that now. That's more of within the last decade and a half, people have started referring to it as coaching or life coaching. It comes from the idea of, like, you would think of sports coaching, right? Where with a sports coach, what happens? Let's say someone who's a batting coach, you're going to essentially have a person who's very skilled come alongside the person who's having problems and help them to identify skills or parts of those skills that need a little bit of extra work or improvement. In other words, they already have the skill. They just need to tweak it, fine tune it, so that they can get to peak performance. And the coach will help them do that, whether it's batting or pitching or throwing a football or whatever it may be. So extending that same metaphor to the world of mental health and behavioral health, a life coach is someone who comes alongside a person essentially and helps them to identify where they are in life with regard to things like relationships and health and finances and a bunch of other things in life. And then you find out where they are, where it is that they want to be, and what the gap is and why is the gap there. And then you help them essentially using skill sets that they already have, that they already come with, built in, basically. You help them to bridge the gap between where they are and where they want to be. Now, that differs from things like therapy or counseling, because those helping professions typically require years of study that lead to a certification or a license. Coaches, at least at the moment, are not typically licensed or required to have a license or certification. It doesn't mean that they're not prepared, because you go through quite a bit of training in order to become a coach, and some practical coaching, of course, but they're not required to be licensed or certified, but they do have to have a broad understanding of the different principles that are going to help people get where they need to be. But they can't legitimately I can't hang a shingle and say I'm a certified counselor or certified therapist, because that would be unethical and it would be incorrect. But they're also not consultants, because that has a definition of its own that we won't get into. They're not mentors, because that's a different type of dynamic, but they are essentially people who help you to find where you are, where you want to be, and how to bridge that gap.
Oh, that's amazing. That's cool beans. I get it. We have a question from Robert, and he said, I started career coaching about 2 weeks ago. I noticed my coach emphasizes on honest conversation and many, many questions. What is one question you ask clients that always shifts the room?
Right. Well, before I answer the question, let me just say that you hit it right on the head about the coaching approach. Coaching involves exactly that, many, many questions, because one of the reasons why we don't get the results that we want is because we're asking the wrong questions of ourselves. So if you say to yourself, well, why am I not able to write that screenplay? And your answer to yourself is essentially, well, because I don't have any creativity, I don't have a creative bone in my body, right? This is how many of us think, when the reality is probably not that at all, but you're already conditioned to give that kind of a response without thinking it through. So if you ask a better quality question, like, what's one thing I can do to further my screenwriting career, that's going to get you a better result than why can't I write a script today, right? So it's a lot of questions. So what's one question that I ask clients that always shifts the room? I ask them what created that limiting belief that they have, because if they can understand where a particular limiting belief came from, then they might have the courage to question that and then to find a more realistic solution. Here's the thing. If you think about everything that we believe, ultimately, if you look at it as a table is just what? It's a flat piece of wood with some legs, right? And we come to believe things. A belief is essentially, we have legs that develop for these tables, and we don't test those legs. We just accept, well, that table is the belief. So let me give you a concrete example. If someone says all dogs are dangerous, well, that's the table on legs.
Right.
You might have had 4 occasions where you passed the dog and the dog growled at you or even bit you, and those are your 4 legs. So you concluded naturally all dogs are dangerous. But then one day, and I've owned 2 of them, you meet a golden retriever.
Yes.
I promise you that a golden retriever would rather have supper with a thief than to do anything to push them away.
You're right about that.
So when you meet that golden retriever, now you've kicked the leg, because now you have evidence that not all dogs are dangerous. Some dogs are dangerous, but not all of them are dangerous. So in that moment, you're questioning that limiting belief. So a question, so it's not a specific general question. It really is more specific to the person, but it's the whole idea about limiting beliefs. Why do you hold that belief, or why do you believe that that's true? Because that person may not have a clue that there are other options in the world. So
no, that's amazing. You're absolutely correct. Especially with golden retrievers, I have 2 of them, so I can relate to that. And we have another question from Sally. Sally says, how do you maintain your new story when old environments trigger past habits?
Yeah. You maintain your new story by continuing to look for and create evidence about your new belief. Right? And by the way, these are fantastic questions. So thanks for that. Yeah. So, your old environments are always going to be there, right? They're typically not going to go away. So the idea with coaching is to help you to recognize when those older beliefs are arising, so that you can note them and say, yep, I see you, you're there. I see you, noted, ignored, and then you go on to the new belief, right? And that takes a little bit of practice, because you believe that thing for so long that it's become like a table that cannot be moved. But the more that you kick those legs with new beliefs, with new evidence, with new reference points is another way that you could put it, the more you're going to realize that there is the possibility of a new belief. You don't have to go back to the old ones. And I dare say that for many things in your life, you're never going to go back to the old one, because you're going to recognize it for the lie that it was, or for the exaggeration that it was. And you're going to become so skilled at it, because it is a skill that you're developing when you're coaching. And as you recognize those things for what they are, you're going to become strengthened in that new belief.
No, that makes perfect sense. No, and I know sometimes sometimes people will find other people to validate that table, even though they may know that table is not right. I've seen that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And those pressures are real, right?
Yes.
That's one thing. It's important to understand that there's no shame in, we all have that. We all have limiting beliefs, right? I have strategies, and I'm constantly coaching myself, and I'm constantly, self-coaching. And I also have a coach. I think that a life coach that doesn't have a coach themselves is doing themselves a disservice and their clients a disservice. I need to go and recognize blind spots and limiting beliefs that continue to affect me. So there's no shame in that, but it's empowering to know that you do have options, and that you do have choices that you may not have thought you had before.
Absolutely. We have a question from Michael, and he said, I think I heard you say earlier in your intro that you specialize in coaching men. I have 2 teenage boys. What are the unspoken pressures men carry that often go unnoticed?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to thank you for what you do, because raising children in general is tough, and raising teen boys in particular is quite a feat. I raised 3 of them, my own. No, not my own. My wife and I raised those boys. I better be careful to say that.
You do.
Right? But my point is that we raised 3 boys. Yeah. So I know how tough that it could be. And in terms of the pressures that they carry, oh boy, where do I start? I specialize in, I will coach anybody, but my niche, if you will, or my specialty is coaching young men around the ages 24 to 35, predominantly ones who are not quite teens, but the ones who are sort of starting out in life. But the pressures on teens are just the beginning stages of what they were experiencing in the age group that I serve. But there are 4 main areas where young men are having issues. And again, it starts at a very early age in a different context with teens. But that's things like, work and economic disconnection, right? Or a big one is that's more appropriate for teens is loneliness and isolation, right? There are we live in the most connected age probably in history, in human history, in terms of all the electronics, and yet I believe it's the most disconnected in history, because along with all that electronic connection, you've lost so much of what we used to consider as community. And without that community and all those different voices, you lose something in that. And that's a whole rabbit hole that we can go down for a while. Mental health in general, it increases in, and this is all backed up by statistics, right? Anxiety, low motivation, escapism, whether that's through things like doom scrolling, right? And that's more, I think grown-ups do more doom scrolling through the news and all that, right?
Yeah.
But anybody could do it. Gaming, and I'm not saying that any of these things in and of themselves are necessarily bad, right? Just put in quotation air quotes. But because but things like, for example, overly escaping into things like gaming or doom scrolling, or a big one that's really been predominant, especially with teens, is pornography use, right? Gambling as you get older. I mean, this is so many mental health areas that you got to look at that serve as means of not dealing with the connection issues and the isolation issues. And another big one is just identity and purpose confusion, right? Because there are, in many instances, a lack of clear rites of passage, things that would have looked much different when I was growing up and when Jose was growing up. They're different today. And there's also a shortage of healthy male role models out there. So there's a lot of lack of structure, and there are all kinds of challenges or spiritual grounding. And by spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious, right? Just something greater than themselves. So this is all, I know I'm speaking in general terms, but these are all commonalities that are the pressures that men carry that often go unnoticed, and people pretty much just deal with it and keep going from day to day without really addressing those issues, and you pay a price for that, not only as individuals but as a society. And if you don't address those issues, as I personally don't believe that they're being addressed to the extent that they need to be addressed, if you don't deal with them in the long run, you wind up with men that lack clear identity and purpose, or that lack structure and accountability. They lack a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. Then they tend to be more passive instead of active in society, and they tend to be less confident and disciplined, and all that translates to danger, right?
Wow. No, those are all good points. I think you have mentioned some of the things about talk about shame and vulnerability, and those are sensitive topics, and I see how people, they try to avoid talking about. Why do you think it's so important for people in general to face these things, and what kind of differences can that make in their lives?
You're talking about vulnerability and shame?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much for asking that. It's so important to understand that a big part of what is causing mental health crises in our day, in my opinion, based upon the research and based upon anecdotal evidence, is that people confuse the meanings of things like vulnerability or shame or courage. And I got to give credit where credit is due here, because I don't pull this stuff out of a hat, and none of this is original to me, right? Many of you out there might be aware of an individual by the name of Brene Brown, Brene Brown, Brene Brown. She is a researcher, a research professor at the University of Houston, and she's famous for a couple of TED Talks on these topics, specifically on vulnerability and shame. So much of what I'm saying today is in line with what she's taught. And I think people confuse vulnerability with weakness. And nothing could be further from the truth. And in order to realize that you need to make changes, and to even want to accept something like coaching, you have to make yourself vulnerable. Because a lot of times what will happen, you'll go and, I don't know if any of you ever saw, there's a Netflix special out there on Tony Robbins. It's called I'm Not Your Guru. If anyone saw that, there's a point at which Tony is, he coaches people from the crowd, and someone comes up and he's trying to explain something to them, and they're looking at him with the look, and he expresses it. Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, because that's the look that people, right? I already know that. So because you got to put up that barrier, right? That
right.
You're not telling me anything I don't know, but in the meantime, you're dying inside, right? Because you can't admit that in society because, that's a weakness, and I got to say, men are especially attuned to this. But anyway, so the idea is that vulnerability is weakness, and the way that Brene talks about it, vulnerability is what? It's uncertainty it involves risk, it involves emotional exposure, but in honesty, it's quite frankly the most accurate measure of courage, because for you to be vulnerable means that it requires you to show up and be seen, right? Even if success isn't guaranteed, and especially if you can't control the outcome, to go out there and put yourself out there, it's the only way that you could succeed, because if you don't do that, you're gonna 100% of the time you're gonna fail, right? So failure is not, we're afraid of failure in our society too. And if you fail, then well, you're not deserving, because ultimately we have a need to feel loved and to feel seen and to feel adequate. And one of the worst things for us is to not feel those things. So we think if we make ourselves vulnerable, that those inadequacies are going to come out. But the truth of the matter is that you have to make yourself vulnerable if you're going to eventually, have success. And then shame in our culture is also something that's very heavily misunderstood, whether that's shaming yourself or shaming others. Shame is essentially, and I'm oversimplifying this, of course, but shame is essentially the feeling or belief that we're flawed in and of ourselves, right? Or that we've done something that makes us unworthy of connection. And that's worse than death for human beings. That's worse than death.
Wow.
If you feel that you're not worthy of connection, because the worst thing you can do, we're relational creatures, right? And I come from a religious context, and I believe that our Creator made us to be relational creatures. But whether you believe that or not in your personal belief system, I think we can all agree that human beings, from whatever source, have something in us that requires us to connect with one another, and that this detriment to ourselves as individuals and to our communities if we don't have that connection and we don't express it. And I think we're seeing a lot of the fruit of that, unfortunately, in our day. So shame is a thing that gets you there. There is no, and we can have this debate, and I understand that some people will not agree with me. I do not believe that shame is a good motivator. I know some people will use it, and they will say you got to put someone to shame, you got to shame someone. In the Spanish culture, I heard many times growing up, you should be, some version of you should be ashamed of yourself. I get it.
Yeah.
And I leave that to you and to your personal preference. I personally have seen too many lives damaged by that. And people who use it towards others as well as themselves. And there are alternatives to that, right? So unless we can get a grip on ourselves and get better strategies that take us away from that feeling of inadequacy and unworthiness, I think we're going to continue to see the fruit of that.
Wow. Got a couple of comments. Michael wanted to say thank you for sharing that knowledge, the one that was raising the two boys.
Of course, my pleasure.
Thank you. And then somebody, an anonymous, said, I'm glad that you say vulnerability is not a bad thing.
Totally. And by the way, is everyone going to agree with us? Of course not.
Right.
And I respect everyone's opinion, but I also am not afraid to say something like that, because I don't think it gets said often enough. And I think that we need to give ourselves permission to be vulnerable, because and especially men. All right.
Yes.
And when I see all the things I described before, part of what makes those things intensify in their destructiveness is that men do not make themselves vulnerable, and therefore they think they have to do everything by themselves and climb out of a hole by themselves, and that's just not possible. That's just not possible.
And I can attest to that. Growing up with my dad, he would say, in other language, suck it up, because we don't talk about mental health, the issues. He was an alcoholic. There were so many things that were, como se dice, put in a Rolodex behind. So we don't talk about that. We don't talk about anything. And then you just have to be strong, even though you're weak as anything, but you have to. Perception is everything. In front of my friends, I couldn't talk about it, even though we were all going through it. It was just, I didn't find this out till later on in life when I got older. But you're right. You're right. We're going to go with one more question, and then we're going to talk about how people can contact you and reach you. So the question is, what legacy do you hope your work leaves for the next generation of men and leaders? And that's from Yvette.
Oh, so nice. That's such a nice question. Wow, that's a big one. Recognizing that what I do is just one little drop in the bucket. If I can do my part to help men, young men in particular, to understand that that you don't have to do it alone, that there is more than one way to do something to achieve what you want. And let me just insert this real quick, because you said something, Jose, that reminded me. You have extremes. I talked about role models earlier.
Yes.
You have, especially for young men, extremes out there of what men are supposed to be like, right? What is a real man, whatever that is, right? And you have on one extreme, well, they should be, there are no real differences, and this is opinions, right? There are no real differences between men and women, so they should be, more, this way, where they're more like women, etc. And then you have the other extreme that says, well, no, they got to be, they got to be, macho and tough, and they got to assert themselves with the opposite sex, and in terms of pain, going through pain in life, well, pain is just weakness leaving the body, that kind of thing, right? So without naming names, we've all heard these different sides. And is there a middle ground? That's where I hope to help people find the middle ground. Without getting too technical, you have problems to be solved and you have polarities to be managed, right? So polarity, north and south, there's no one solution. Right? Breathing is a polarity. You breathe in oxygen, you exhale carbon monoxide. So if I say to you, stop breathing in oxygen, well, that's ridiculous, right? But if I say stop exhaling carbon monoxide, that's also ridiculous. Breathing is not a problem to be solved. It's a polarity to be managed. And when we try to resolve things as if everything is a problem, that's a mistake. So, so it's important to understand that there's a lot of stuff dealing with men that it is a polarity. There are appropriate times to be tough, and there are appropriate times to be softer. Where's the happy balance in between? And if I can help men understand that, help them find their identity, right? Help them find their purpose so that they're not aimless, and understand that if I could teach them how to, maybe if I sum it up this way, if I could teach them how to manage their minds so that they realize that their lives can change because of changing their thinking instead of trying to change the circumstance. Right. You don't have control over a circumstance, which is the fact. You do have control over what you think, and that's true of anyone, not just men, obviously. Okay, so if I can help train young men to think, I will have succeeded.
Absolutely, that's awesome. So let's go into, let's see what you got here, and I'll leave it up to you. There you go, Carlos.
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways to reach me. My website is pretty easy to remember. It's my name, karlosdeltoro.com. So once you get past the fact that my name starts with a K than a C, I was little, I didn't have a choice in the matter. Then it's just karlosdeltoro.com. And I try to keep the site simple. It's really just a one-pager that you just scroll down a little bit. And if anyone is interested in the future in seeing what's possible in terms of coaching, you can schedule a discovery session by selecting that button up at the top there. And that's by the way, a no-cost session. It's a 45-minute no-cost session where we talk about what coaching is and what your circumstances are, and if we would be a good fit together. So you could do it either by pressing that button, and at the moment it's going to go to my email, my business email, but I'm working on it to go directly to a scheduler so that you can actually pick a time, a date and a time, and I should have that ready soon. Or you can text me at the 461-3074 number. You can call or text me. You can do it that way as well.
All right.
So this center section tells you a little bit about me, who I am and what I stand for, why doing this work is important, and how we'd work together. And many of those things I covered with you today.
All right.
This explains a little bit about how we would work together, typically one-on-one coaching. And you'll notice, by the way, that this site is geared towards men, because that, again, is the specialty that I focus on, because you can't market, being all things to all people is just not a wise strategy. But please know that it doesn't have to be career coaching. It can be any type of life coaching, but that's my central focus. So if you have or know young men who might be interested in this, or parents of young men who might be interested, then this explains how I'll do that. I'm working also on the possibility of opening group coaching, because you can reach a lot more people in a short period of time. I'm not quite there yet, so at the moment it's one-on-one, but I will be putting events out there, like webinars, for example, where I will post on this site, and then those will be group situations, and eventually it'll be some type of group coaching of that nature.
All right.
And then once again, you can, I think for the moment, the top section is going to be the best in order to schedule a session with me. But sometimes people just have questions, right? And I wanted to have a section where you can submit a question or a comment, and that's at the bottom there. And if someone sends me a question and they say, "Hey, can I schedule something?" I'll be looking at that as well. You don't have to. I'm not wed to just the top one, so you can use either or.
Okay.
So this is my LinkedIn page, and I believe that that Jose will be sharing links to both of these with you. If you want to know a little bit more about my background professionally, you'll find that on this page. And you'll notice in the upper left, the message button there. If you select that, one thing I wanted to offer today is if you are interested, you could do a discovery session, but you could also take advantage of what I'm about to offer, which is, I talked earlier about the 6 human needs. I usually charge in order to go through sessions on the 6 human needs, and I have a survey to go through for that. So I won't do the whole package, but for the first 5 people who message me and indicate that they were in the session today and use the code news story, for the first 5 who do that, I will schedule with you a session to talk about the 6 human needs, what they are, and give you an initial understanding of your 6 human needs. And we'll do that. That'll be a 30-minute session for the first 5 people who do that.
They can say, "Hey, we heard it on the Motivated Mindset," that they watched it.
Absolutely. I've got also the Motivated Mindset podcast, and I heard and give code news story, and we'll take care of you.
Ooh, wow. All right. And here is where you can reach out to connect with Karlos, to QR code, and the number. And the best way, Karlos, would be, if they wanted to get quick, would be the number, or is that correct?
Yeah. So if so, the number would be the quickest way, but they're all going to the same place essentially. Okay. So it's entirely your choice. And thank you, Jose, for preparing these codes. That makes it much easier, and it'll take you directly to the sites. But the phone number you can do it phone or text, and either one will get to me quickly. So that's the beauty of living in the age today, where we can communicate in very quickly in all these different ways. So yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're coming down to the end. Is there anything, any last words, anything we didn't cover that you would like to emphasize? I'll wait to see if there's any more questions, but until we get questions, I give the last few minutes to you, Karlos.
I appreciate that. Well, the one thing I'll just say, just generally talking about the theme of the day, is that just a reminder that you have a lot more agency, what I call it, to accomplish the things that you want to do in life than sometimes you think you do. I don't have time to go through it now, but I mentioned the difference between circumstance and thinking, and that's everything. A circumstance is something that 100 people will all agree is exactly what that is. If I tell you that the sun is up there, that's a circumstance, right? Because we would all agree that the sun's up there. But the second that I add a qualifier to that and say, well, that's the biggest sun I've ever seen, or it's kind of a bad example, but as soon as you say something that qualifies it, you've now graduated to a thought. And in real life, in the everyday, we do that all the time with the things in our lives, where we ascribe something to a particular circumstance, and it's not the circumstance that's holding us back. It's the thinking about that circumstance. So if you think about life being 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it, when you really give that some thought, you realize how much more power you have over that thing that you thought that you cannot do. Or whether it's people, circumstances happening around you, world events, right? We can go in all kinds of directions with politics, and you have a lot of agency, right? You don't have to think a certain way. You don't have to behave a certain way. So if I can leave you with anything today, it's think about the difference between the facts and how you're thinking about the facts, and it will change your life.
Wow. And we have a comment from Olga that says, that was so enlightening. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I love these wonderful questions.
Yeah, no, they were good. And Carlos, thank you for being. I know it made me think a little bit about things, but it actually made me think about how I grew up and what I was exposed to, and how I thought, and how it evolved as I grew older.
Me too. Yeah, absolutely.
So but I don't see any more. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you for being here. And Carlos, of course, thank you. And we'll, if once you get any upcoming events, please let us know, and we'll be showcasing. But you dropped a lot of golden nuggets, a lot of stuff we need to hear, especially as a man.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. And I absolutely will share with you whatever I can in the future. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. And keep up the great work you're doing with this podcast.
Oh no, well, thank you. Me and Yvette, my partner, she keeps me on top of things. So
awesome.
And and Yvette says thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, continue to chime in and watch our podcast. But everybody had a good one. Y gracias por todo. I'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.